Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you're joining us for the Rochester Community Schools Special Education Town Hall. Superintendent Robert Shaner, we're glad you've joined us. I'd like to start out today by introducing our guests that are with us. And again, this is the Special Education Town Hall, and welcome. Concetta, would you begin, please?
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Concetta Lewis, Executive Director for Special Education with Rochester. I'm really glad to be able to take this time tonight to share some additional information, answer questions. You reach out afterwards if you still have questions.
Good afternoon. I'm Debbie Fragomeni, Deputy Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. Very honored to be here today, and thank you for joining this. You may have joined one of the other town halls today, but in design, we were very intentional that there's some specific questions that you may have, and we felt it important to honor this time with you, and we look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you both. I'd just like to say a few introductory remarks, just kind of from a more global position in terms of the entire district and the time frame of what we're dealing with. If you remember, this crisis really got into full swing at the end of February, the beginning of March, and we formed a task force in our district and have been using that task force to plan and execute all of our contingencies as we've moved through the crisis. In May, the governor formed the Return to School Advisory Council, which I'm a member of, and I participate and continue to participate in. And on June 30th, the governor put out her Return to School roadmap. I often have to remind myself because I forget what day it is because it's quite an operational tempo. But it's July 28th, so we're under a very, very compressed timeline. And we're so blessed to work with so many great people across the school district. If you caught the board meeting last night, the work session, we put a list up of over 100 people, and that list is probably not inclusive of everyone that's contributed to the amazing work that's going on in support of our students and our staff. As always, the safety of our students and staff is our #1 priority. And I just kind of want to back up on a couple of things before we just really get into the nitty-gritty and talk about our options for learning and how we keep people safe. But again, going back to that timeline and thinking about how we've moved forward from there, you may have recently seen a Channel 7 interview with me regarding opening of school. And I understand some people had some consternation about why I did that interview when I did and got out really before we got the information in front of the board at the work session and maybe on social media. And I just wanted to clear that up a little bit because advocacy is incredibly, I know with our special education community and our PAC, which plays such an important role in our community, that advocacy is really, really important. And from time to time, I'm contacted by various advocacy groups for public education and asked to serve, I guess, as an expert, as a trusted expert. And this was one of those cases. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of influence in the broadcast industry in terms of when things are broadcasted at day and time. But I had to make a decision of whether I wanted to engage in a story that would provide information potentially to legislators and policymakers and bring it to the forefront of what we were potentially up against, or to keep quiet and not advocate. So I chose to advocate, not knowing when the story would be aired. Potentially they would be aired before the Monday night work session. And it did get aired early, but I think it served a purpose. I remember walking into the room with the reporter of the socially distanced room that we're not really capable of executing, but her jaw dropped because, once you really see what these protocols are like and once you feel them and feel what the changes that are going to take place in a school building, it becomes real. So we did that Channel 7 story to raise awareness of not only the budgetary constraints that we're under, but the logistical and architectural constraints and just the time and space. And I just want to go back real quickly to the budget as well, because I mentioned that. You may be aware that the 1920 budget, when the board adopted an amendment, we were planning for a proration. Fortunately, the Senate and House leadership and the governor came to an agreement on that budget where we did not have to suffer a proration. But the pupil accounting standards as part of that supplemental budget are in place until October 1st, the end of the fiscal year. So in terms of our days and hour requirements for pupil accounting, for our attendance, and for our seat time waiver, we are only good until October 1st. And then we're going to have to wait on the 2021 budget. At this time, there is no 2021 budget for our school district in terms of money from the state. We passed a budget in June by law, but the state's fiscal year doesn't end until October 1st. And at this point, we have no prediction of what our revenue might be. It also impacts our staffing. And one of the reasons we've asked people to, if they can, let us know what they would like to do by August 1st, because we have 1,500 employees who rely on us for a livelihood, and we have to do staffing. And I know it's been an imposition on our families to have to think about what they're going to do in September. And for that, I'm sorry, but I'm asking for your help here so we can start to think about what staffing looks like, how many kids will be enrolled in virtual, how many kids will be enrolled in person, and then start to think about what the opening of the school year looks like, whether it's potentially a remote start or an in-person start. These are all very, very challenging times. If you watch the board meeting from last night, there's a multitude of complexities and choke points. Some of those are protocols we're waiting on from the health department, and some of them are things like athletics and personal protective equipment and so on and so forth. So before we got into the questions, I wanted to take a minute to have the bully pulpit to talk about those things because it's so important. And you may think it doesn't have anything to do with education, but it has everything to do with education. It has everything to do with being able to provide a systemic world-class education for our students, where they know they're loved and they're really receiving really high-quality services. As in terms of the start of the school year, ladies and gentlemen, I would say this: we will do the right thing when the right time is to make that decision. If I were to make a decision today, if I was forced to make a decision today about the beginning of the school year, unfortunately, I would probably opt for a remote start for a lot of different reasons. But there is time to be had here, and there are things that are going to be played out, and we'll make a decision at the right time that decision needs to be made, and we'll make that decision with caution to ensure the safety of our students and our staff. So with that, I'm glad you're here. I appreciate your time. We appreciate your support and your grace and patience. And I'd like to turn it over to Concetta to answer your questions that you've submitted. And again, thank you so much.
All right, so we have a few questions that parents have submitted, and we'll go through them. And again, if your question doesn't get answered tonight, feel free to reach out afterwards. I want to start before I get to the questions and just saying, as Dr. Shaner mentioned, I'm very thankful for our PAC. They have been great collaborative partners and thought partners in helping us work through this, sharing ideas, even sharing the idea of let's have a town hall for special education. So I just wanted to let them know that we appreciate them and we look forward to a continued partnership. With that, I'll start with the first question. So what is the plan to support early on students and families? These services usually take place in homes and daycares. So right now we are working to develop a plan because it is unlikely that we will start with staff providing services in homes for students. So we're working on an alternative plan for that, which might mean virtual services, depending on where we are as a district. Perhaps it might be on-site in district or on-site at a daycare, but we are working through that process and we'll reach out to families probably mid-August with additional details on that. Next question. Will special needs students who can't wear a mask due to their disabilities be restricted in their own classrooms or when it comes to gen ed? Part of the return to school roadmap indicates that if a student is medically unable to wear a mask, they will not have to wear a mask. So we're working through how that process works. But I will say this, there might be As our board president said last night, and Dr. Shaner said earlier today in one of the other town halls, even though we will return to buildings, it won't be normal. And it will likely be a very long time, months, probably sometime into 2021 before we begin to really carve out what our new normal will look like. So there might be some changes in the way students are receiving services or the way that inclusion takes place. So we might have to make some adjustments given where we are. Question 3. Will the new remote learning plan incorporate all of the stipulations that must be met in a student's IEP? How will this be maintained? Students are entitled to an education that meets their needs. So when we shift to remote learning, part of the challenge in shifting to remote learning is that it is not in person. We know that in person for many of our students is the best way to provide instruction. And we may not be able to fully duplicate the exact services that are documented in their IEP. What we're currently working on is developing what I like to call remote learning 2.0, where students receive some direct, individualized, either one-on-one or small group instruction with their special ed teachers or with their ancillary staff, with their speech services. I know that when we went on remote learning 1.0, we had to do it quickly, we had to pull things together. But this time we're looking at how can we make the best use of the time that we have with our students. And so again, our goal is to have some one-on-one services provided to students, as well as some small group instructional components for students directly from service providers. Question 4, and if I misunderstand this question, please feel free to reach out. Is the district planning on full transition services for semester 2 that weren't implemented for the spring fall move-ups? So we are, I understand this to mean you're wondering, now my baby is going from elementary to middle school. What happened to my move-up day where they could go and walk the building, see where the lockers were, find out where their homeroom class was? So we are working on a plan to support those students who will be new to buildings, whether it is kindergarten students, whether it is 6th grade students, whether it is 9th grade students, how we can best support them in understanding and learning their new environment before all of the other students come to the building. So that is a part of our plan. We haven't fully finalized it, but that is on our radar. Question 5, families have the right to choose virtual learning and still receive specialized instruction services. As I believe it was it might've been in the elementary and the secondary, but earlier today, they talked about really the differences and between what virtual learning is and traditional in-person learning. And virtual learning is a very, the concept is very much independent. It's a different learning style. It's a different teaching methodology for students, which might not be appropriate for all students with IEPs. I had lots of parents reach out to me when we were on our remote learning and saying, oh, I don't like this. Can we please get back to the buildings? So again, there are some students that actually thrived. I talked with some parents in the remote learning, and virtual learning might be very well appropriate. Because students have an IEP that currently indicates and is designed for in-person traditional instruction, in order to make that decision, is virtual learning appropriate or not, IEP teams will have to come together, talk through that decision, and really decide what is going to be best for those individual students. Because again, as we talked about last night, maintaining the integrity of what students, the services and the programs that are written into those IEPs are top priority for us. So one of the things that Dr. Shaner talked about is, how we care. We want to move through this with fidelity. So it's important that we don't change the context of what we know and understand the needs of our students to be, and we keep that documented, but also recognize we know that we might have to shift into remote learning and we'll have to make some adjustments. And there might be some recovery services that come later as a result of remote learning. But we want to make sure that we keep the integrity of those IEPs. So there might be some situations where the team determines virtual might not be the best mode of learning for a particular student. So it's not that we are trying to tell you what to do, but again, they have an IEP and we are working together as a team.
Consetta, if I could please add, just for families, we emphasize and we honor the questions that you have and the children that you are advocating for. We love them. There's a multitude of teachers that serve your children that are sitting here listening to these questions because they want to do what's best for your family. I assure you, I have many colleagues and friends in special education, and the IEP process is valued and respected. The 504 process is equally so. Inclusion, belonging is integral to the work that we're doing. And I'd like you to know that. And I'd also like to share the evidence of that in terms of, we did a survey with our staff in terms of how we finished the school year, how we made these adjustments. And the piece that came forward, which we've heard from families as well, was wasn't as robust, or we needed more time with the kids. And that goes back to our mission of our compelling why, which is about those relationships and how important they are. So as we're planning moving forward with our special education leaders and all of the staff members, we're working collaboratively together because that relationship piece is essential. So if we were to begin in remote or transition to remote, the experience will be different than what it was in March. And I'm not taking anything away from what that time was. We've never been in this situation, but our hearts are in the right place, and we're going to ensure that your child receives the instruction and the education that they so greatly deserve.
Thank you, Debbie. Are there plans for IEP teams or case managers to reach out to parents to let them know how services are going to be delivered in the fall? Yes, as building teams and principals work with their team to determine what's our plan for how will students navigate the building? What will be the plan when students move from maybe the gen ed classroom to the resource room, or spend time with the speech therapist? So yes, we will reach out about what that plan looks like before students actually return to the building. How are students with IEPs going to be assessed? And what is the timeline for parents and team meetings? Referencing page 32 of the state roadmap document, please clarify how RCS is planning to set students up for success because of the gap from spring. As we talked about earlier, I will start with, there are a variety of ways that students might be assessed. It really depends on, is it a math goal that they're working on? Is it a reading goal? Is it a language goal? So there are multiple ways that those goals might be assessed. Some of that information is probably documented already in the IEP. If we move to a remote learning plan, that information would be documented, how we are going to monitor their progress on their goals and objectives in the contingency learning plan. This, as Debbie talked about, is a new piece that we didn't do this spring, but each student will have an individual contingency learning plan when we move into remote that details, these are the services, the supports, this is how often you can expect the service provider to connect with your student, and this is how we will report on the progress. Students will still have progress reports completed that will be available when report cards are issued. So again, this all goes into us having that more robust remote learning plan. Page 32 references the piece around recovery services and IEP teams coming together to evaluate things that students may have missed during the school closure. As annual IEP meetings come up, teams will review that and talk about what can we do, given it depends on where we are at that particular time, how much flexibility we have around what additional supports and services we might be able to provide. So really, how we provide recovery services, again, may not occur until 2021. It just depends on where we are as a district at the time of that IEP meeting. And I'll say this, remember that as a parent, you can always say, even if it's not time for your child's annual IEP, you can always reach out to your team and say, I'd love to have the team come together. I want to talk about some things. So it's not a once a year stipulation. That meeting can happen at any time throughout the school year. Question 8, how will it be handled if the special education student has a medically fragile or high risk immediate family member? Will a doctor's note be required to evidence this and then receive homebound services? As Dr. Shaner talked about, there are some things that within the law, we don't have much room at this point. During the spring, we had that flexibility where you didn't need a doctor's note to develop a contingency learning plan or a homebound support if we were doing in-person instruction. Unfortunately, at this time, we don't have that flexibility. So if there's a situation where a student is unable to attend because of health risk factors, that would require a doctor's note in order to receive the virtual homebound services. And I will add that those services will again look very much like the remote learning services with direct support from a special education teacher, direct support from special education providers every week, several times throughout the week. So that is that. Question 9. Our special needs population does not do well with remote learning. Could they continue with in-person learning if we have to switch back to remote? They generally have smaller class sizes, have one school keep a few CI rooms open for this purpose, even alternating days. This is one of those conversations that we have been having as we think about reopening, who comes back first, how do we get students to the building, how do we ensure safety for everyone? So this is a consideration that we are considering. Question 10, we love that a resource room is provided for breaks in education. How will the resource room be handled in in-person and in remote learning? So I'll start with in-person, and I'll take the easy one first. So at the high school level, typically the resource is a class period within the day. So students would continue to have that resource class period available as part of their schedule. If they have breaks scheduled throughout the day, I'm sure building administrators would continue to work to find ways for them to have those break spaces, appropriate spaces for them to take those breaks. At the elementary level for resource support, we understand the importance of cohorting, but we also understand the importance of students receiving their services. And so we've been talking through if students inside of their classroom didn't have on a mask, when they went to the resource room, they might put on a mask, dispose of that before they went back into their classroom so that those germs weren't in the classroom, and then go back into their classroom with their other students. So we're working on those processes. I've been having conversations with Corey, especially about the elementary level. How do we do this? Because we do know this is important. We've been talking about, for our speech therapists, locating masks that are clear on the front, and even for some of our early childhood students, because language acquisition at the younger ages is extremely important. And so we understand that it's not just hearing, but it's also seeing the expression of that language that's important. So we're working to make that happen. 11, how is eligibility for virtual learning and compatibility with an IEP determined? Will teams include parents and student advocates when they meet over the summer to assess the appropriateness of virtual learning for a student with an IEP? Again, absolutely. The parents are a part of every IEP team. We want them in the conversation. Advocates are always welcome because they help us to navigate sometimes some difficult conversations. and that's okay. So we welcome advocates. Parents will be a part of those conversations. And yes, IEP teams will reach out. If you've submitted a virtual application, the teams will reach out in August to begin having those conversations. And there's no, this is how that conversation goes. So I don't have, parents call me, is my child, can they go virtual? Well, I don't know. I'm not familiar with your child. The best people to have that conversation are the individuals who have worked with your child on a regular basis and really have a good understanding of your student and their learning style. And so that's what we want to happen. I can go through yes, no, but that is not effective. How will educators mitigate cohort cross-contamination if working with students from multiple classrooms on a daily basis? I know that this question also came up in one of the town halls earlier, and this is something that we are working through. So we might be looking at reorganizing how our paraprofessional support is provided to students and how we're supporting students in various environments to ensure the safety of students, of staff, and then when everyone goes home, families as well. So we are working through that process. How are services like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech, and social work going to be provided in school, given the space guidelines? These services are determined needs and required to be provided. You are correct. So we've been talking about, I mentioned the clear mask. When we talk about social work and occupational therapy, we've talked about, are there other types of PPE, personal protective equipment, that staff might need who are working with some students and have to come in close proximity with students. So we're working through all those components, and that might look different in each situation depending on the need of the student. We've talked about even for some speech rooms, if for spacing purposes, do we look at the potential of some plexiglass and speech spaces so that students can see if that is a part of that speech therapy. So we're working through what that might look like. Can students still have speech, OT, social work, OT or social work in person at their school if they are doing virtual academy for academics? So students that are enrolled in the virtual academy, if they have an IEP and receive services, those services would also be received virtually. So if you enroll in the virtual IEP, everything is virtual. Your special ed services are virtual. Your classroom is virtual. Everything is virtual. And they do not mix. So you wouldn't come back to the building for your speech therapy with your speech group. If you would have a new speech group, if it was a group, or maybe a new individual therapy service time. If we go online, will special ed para support continue? Many special education students have built trusting relationships with paras they work with. Maintaining those relationships is important. And this will vary. There will be some situations where para support will be a part of the remote learning. So this will really vary depending on the students, the classroom, and the level of support that the students need during that time. Question 18, please make every effort to place virtual learners from the same homeschool and speech and social work groups. This would be nice, but we cannot guarantee it. So they might not be with, if they have a small group or a social work group in the virtual academy, they may not be with students that were previously in their homeschool or in their neighborhood. So it really depends on the enrollment and how many students we have to support in that process. RCS continues to work on protecting our children. Would you consider face shields for teachers so students can hear the teacher clearer and see their face? I believe our nurse Tanya talked about face shields being an add-on to the face covering. So the face shield does not eliminate the face covering, it's in addition to. But again, we're looking at finding a face covering that has a clear front to allow for that visual communication component. If needed to switch from in-class to remote, is there any expected delay in instruction or IEP services? So I wouldn't necessarily say that we would expect a long delay, but again, as soon as we make that decision that we will flip into remote services, that will be the time that we have to work through that contingency learning plan, developing what that looks like for each student. So I would say that might take a day or two, depending on the size of caseloads for staff members to be able to do that. And then I would say by the third day, services should be beginning, approximately. So if it's the fourth day, please don't hate me, okay? You told me, okay. Oh, I just read that one. RCS has great social workers who teach our students to know their limits. If a student's IEP incorporates breaks, will there be a place for students to go when they have reached their limit? Yes, I just said that, I'm sorry. Many of you have the same questions. In person, how will we achieve general education inclusion, especially if a lot of our students won't keep a mask on? Perhaps reverse inclusion. Socialization and exposure to typical children is very important, especially for students with autism. How can we provide this while staying safe? So this, again, as I talked about, is one of, when I read that plan, this was one of the first things that stuck out to me, was how do I ensure that my students who need that peer-to-peer interaction the most are able to continue to maintain that. So we have some groups of teachers that have been meeting and thinking about what this might look like at the elementary level. We've been meeting with our teacher consultants for autism and CI to talk about how can we do this safely for students and for staff. Social skills. How does RCS plan to help ECSC students, those are our babies that are 3 to 5, work on social skills and classroom readiness in a virtual environment? So I'm assuming this means that if we have to go to remote instruction, how will we work on these skills? This means that we have to become more creative. So we might have to have some videos around it, things that would be engaging, some small group activities where maybe there are 4 students in a small Zoom and they have to take turns. And so those are things that we can still teach in a Zoom, because as children are, they're all going to want to talk at the same time. And so one of the things that we can still teach them, even in a Zoom, is let's let so-and-so go first. It's not your turn yet. When they finish, then you can continue. So there are ways that we can continue to teach those social skills, even virtually, and we will work through that process. How will IEP accommodations for quiet work areas be addressed? Will this be consistent in buildings district-wide? So that might look different in each building, but if a student has written into their IEP that they would need a quiet space to take a test or a quiet space for an assessment, that will still be available and accessible to them, but how that is handled in each building might be a bit different. Will 504 plans be solidified before school starts? We would like to hope that all plans are solidified, but I can't guarantee. So I'm going to suggest that if that was your question, please reach out to your building principal so that we can find out why the plan isn't quite solidified yet, and we can get to the heart of what that issue is to make sure that whatever that child needs before school starts, they have it. We have appreciated the focus on social and emotional wellness within RCS. We believe in helping our child face her anxieties, but COVID has increased these due to all the restrictions and protocols. Although not medical, will her IEP be valid if we choose virtual? So again, this is one of those questions that the IEP remains valid. And what happens when a student has to go into the virtual environment or that determination is made, brand new IEP is developed based around the virtual learning environment. And so again, the team will determine, so if she's receiving social work services, the team will determine what is most appropriate for her in that environment, and if that environment is an appropriate learning option for her.
Consetta, if I could add to that, our psychologists, our counselors, and our beloved social workers are intentionally and deliberately making plans in terms of trauma response and helping with the social emotional wellness of our students, all students, but our special learners who require additional repetition or care or feedback. It's a priority, and a lot of the training that will be coming forward to our staff will be on how to work with families, to work with children who have been in a trauma response by being home for such a long time, and about routines. We know routines are everything for all, but for students with special learning skills, it can be essentially important. And I know this personally from my own family growing up with a sister who benefits from routine. Our staff are ready. They are in this profession because of their passion for special learners. And I have every confidence that the training that will be coming forward for just our staff members alone, and the collaboration they're going to be doing with the general education teachers is going to be monumental, and your students will be the benefit factors of that.
Thank you. Individualized learning in the spring for ECSE students. The materials were made for the entire grade. How can we make online more individualized for students? So this is a part of our, if we go to remote learning 2.0, the information that you get will be much more individualized and tailored to the needs of your student versus a broad, here's a blanket of information, worksheets that you can pull from. It will be very targeted. One of the things that I even mentioned to our ECSE team today was to think about, should we consider some weekly packets or bi-weekly packets or kits that families can have to be able to support learning in that environment? Because we know with the little ones, a lot of it is hands-on. And so being able to have those activities and the materials ready so that you as the parent don't have to do the cutting out beforehand. So if we can have everything ready in a kit for you beforehand, that's one of the ideas that we've talked about.
And that's one of the blessings of this district, is that we have highly qualified paraprofessionals, and they are deeply invested and eager to be with your children again. And those relationships are reciprocal, I assure you. So in terms of materials and resources, we have staff that are ready and eager to help support you.
Thank you. If I am paying out of pocket for speech and OT and ABA, how can we differentiate whether school or these services contribute to meeting the IEP goals? That's a good question. And oftentimes we may not be able to differentiate. That's why I'm not a research scientist. So for my parents that are out there watching, if I mess this up, but what I do understand about research is they have certain variables and they try to control for certain variables so that when an outcome happens at the end, they want to be able to say that it was a result of this particular variable or not a result of that. So when you have lots of things going on, sometimes it might be hard to determine which one of those pieces was really the catalyst behind the change. And so unfortunately, we'll be excited about the progress, and from our lens, we're happy. We're like, we think that's wonderful. And I know you want to know, well, which one was it? It is really hard to determine exactly what was the catalyst behind that change. And often it really is everything working together. So and maybe I'm turning into Dr. Shaner at this moment because I got a story to tell, right? So as I get older, I'm taking more vitamins. So I'm taking vitamin C, I'm taking a multivitamin, I'm taking vitamin E, I'm taking vitamin D. And so when I finally was able to get back to the hair salon after, we had been quarantined for months, she was like, "Oh, your hair feels so wonderful." Well, I didn't know if that was because I hadn't done anything to it or because of the vitamins, right? And then which vitamin was it? Was it the vitamin E? Was it the fish oils? Was it the multivitamin? Was it the vitamin C? Or was it all of them working together for that end result? And so sometimes that is why we appreciate the partnership with families and outside agencies, because we know that there's the saying that it's one plants, somebody else plants the seed, somebody else comes along and waters, but then they say that God gives the increase. So somehow we look for it's everything working together that helps students see that success. So don't know how we can tell, sorry. My daughter spends most of her time in a CI classroom. Class sizes are already small, but how will lunch and special classes like gym be handled? Normally, I'm all for inclusion, but in the current environment, I'd like to see her be with just her small peer group as much as possible. So oftentimes, inclusion scenarios are based on information that's written in a student's IEP. So that might be a conversation when you talk about how will lunch and specials happen. Each of the elementary and secondary, they talked about that this morning, but I would say consult with your building principal, see what the schedule is, see how things are going, consult with the IEP team. Do we need to make any adjustments? But remember that this is definitely, even though it doesn't feel like it, it is temporary and it won't be forever. This might be the longest temporary that we've seen, but it is just temporary. And so we want to caution around making decisions in an IEP that are really temporary versus truly what is the need, the long-term need for that student. So that is the end of the question list, Debbie.
Do you have any final comments that you wanted to share with our families?
Let's see. So final comments. I think I just want, I know this is a hard decision to make. It is a lot to take in, not just in most, families. If you have a student with an IEP, just in general, if you don't have a child with an IEP, in this scenario that we're in right now, there's a lot to think about from a family perspective. Work outside the home. So there are so many things that we're thinking about. I encourage you to, breathe, pause, reflect, consult with your building teams. Feel free to call me, email me. I think it was last week, I had a lot of conversations with parents. And at the end, I can't really recall one conversation where a parent really was more upset after the conversation than before the conversation started. Most times by the end of the conversation, even though I didn't have the answers, I didn't have it all figured out, somehow by us coming together and having a conversation, that they were calmer and we were walking through it together. So what I'm offering is that we're here for you. We are supporting you in this and we're walking through this together. So any questions that you have, feel free to reach out. And I look forward to hearing from you.
And I can't think of a finer special education department. The colleagues that are invested in this work, your team, our staff members, we're here for you. We love your students and we want them to be successful. I've had the opportunity and privilege over the years in the district to know and work with many of your families, and it's been an honor and a privilege. And when we look at our learners, we start at birth and we look at students who are at our ATPS up to age 26. And we know there's a lot of uniqueness in what the needs are as your children grow and to flourish. And we want to partner with you. to make that happen forward. We're here for you for that. We will continue having communications and conversations. And there isn't a hard and fast timeline. I think we've mentioned it, but we've had the August 1st deadline, and that, I don't know if Dr. Shaner spoke to it. This is our 5th town hall. So I will just say it one more time. Our purpose for doing that is to ensure that we know which students are going to be in a virtual setting, so that we can start our staffing. Our teachers are so eager to know what they're going to be teaching and who their learners are going to be. So if your family is making decisions and you're still watching the public health data, we honor and respect that, and we're doing the same. We are trying to compress months of planning for the fall into weeks. And so we're going to have some missteps, so please give us some grace. But if you do not feel comfortable for that August 1st deadline, please talk to your building administrator. We're all working on the clock all summer, or your resource teacher, counselors, social workers, those people you have connections with already. And they will help you to navigate through. So please, if that's one burden we can take off as you're making these decisions, you're making them together. You're your child's first teacher. And we are honored to share this partnership with you to provide the very best education and for your child to truly feel loved and valued and respected. So we hope that when you leave this conversation, you will know that the conversations are still to be had. And we just look forward to the day that we can all be together again. It's a pretty special day. So thank you very much for attending, for your patience. Please keep the questions coming. We honor them. We're listening to them. And we will continue to communicate with you, entire community, as we move forward through FAQs, and please check our website. So thank you very much. We hope you have a lovely evening. And Concetta, any last word?
No, you said it beautifully.
Oh, stop. Well, we look forward to welcoming your families, and we are here. Our PAC representatives, thank you so much for helping to support us and to help to support our new families. That is going to be really important. And I envision that the Sparkle Awards this year are going to be like no other. So with that, we wish you the very best, and thank you for your time this evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.